My name's Susan Emigh, and I'm a great example of the wonderful program that Alex now is the director for, and that Terry set up, of the Master of Communications Management that's at McMaster University. What I'm going to give you is a really brief top notes of my capstone project. And where it comes from is I spent 25 years as a journalist in the Hamilton Spectator. Most of that, sometimes as a reporter, sometimes as an editor, and a portion of that time as a market researcher, looking at and developing new products for the paper. And so, being in public relations the last 10 years, I've really been kind of fascinated with the changes happening in media relations. And I hardly need to recap for you here, but the aspect of the fact that the growth of owned media, that is, that we can all now, we have earned media, what we get from the traditional media. We have paid media, obviously, but owned media, which is the websites, the publications, the social media that any institution or company can set up now. So we have that. We can go direct connect. This is exactly what Gunnick said, right? The two-way, symmetrical. We can allow for input. Do we really need traditional media? And we've seen the downgrading or downsizing of a lot of the traditional media over the last 10 years. And some of them are accepting what we provide them much more readily than they would have before. So I've been fascinated with this idea. And I think that Sydney Matrix, who's a associate professor at Queen's University in media, she said it very well in saying we really have a control crisis here in media relations. So I'm going to get right to it. My research questions for my project were I wanted to look at the traditional roles that the media has for gatekeeping. Traditionally, gatekeeping's that being the gate where there's all this information going on. Somebody has to decide what's important enough for those 2, 3, or 100 or 200 items that you're going to absorb today. What's really important. And also setting the public agenda in Canada. And that's where my research, I've gotten into not only what journalists and public relations practitioners think, but also what do policymakers, politicians, and communicators at that level, what do they feel is changing here? So agenda setting is that the mass media influences public opinion, if not by directly affecting the actual decision, at least by influencing what topics are going to be discussed. Now, I was writing this back in January. This is before the whole Senate expenses and the Rob Ford situations happened, which have only ratified this. One of the most quoted lines in this topic area is from a political scientist, Bernard Cohen, back in 1963. He said, "The media is not successful in telling people what to think, but it's remarkably successful in telling people what to think about." Right? So, and we also now have, a lot of people, part of my lit review, which I'm not going to get into here, just to keep to the top notes, looking at the media and how people say, well, now we've got all these different media, different ways of getting information, so there must be even more topics out there to be discussed. But in actual fact, studies have shown that the traditional media and the topics being discussed on other media are the same. Like a lot they're using. There's a lot of duplication. So I wanted to look into that. Also credibility. Who's being listened to? Is it the established media? And is owned media being given any credibility? So Terry's a hard act to follow, and I'm not as used to giving presentations. Yeah. So Conference Board of Canada, credibility leads to purchasing decisions. The less perceived control or the management of PR between the information and the person getting it, then the more credibility it has. Or that's traditionally been the thought. And then how does this relate to us and our use of media, or earned media. So I had two parts to my research. First, quantitative. Although I did secondary research and got a lot of read of what's going on with traditional media and new media in the country, I also had access to a 2007 study that Leger Marketing did for Apex Public Relations in Toronto. And it was a national online study, over 1,500 people. And asking specifically about media use and media credibility. So I echoed that study with a study by Leger as well, 1,500 people, the online national panel they have of almost 500,000 people, and adjusted geographically and demographically. So my study was done in November, and I echoed some of the same questions that were asked in the first study, so that there could be a contrast. So each study had a margin of error 2.5, 19 of 20 times. And this was the specific research questions that I asked. I gave them a list, and this is the answers that I got. Now this is on your little teeny weeny sheet. But what I have here, the full bar is the weekly reach, and the darker bars are daily reach. So that gives you a little sense for occasional versus regular readership or listening or leadership. So we have television news in 2007, television news in 2012, radio, and the newspapers 7 and 12, news websites. And that in the study was news websites not related to major media. So we weren't looking for response on cbc.ca or the Globe and Mail online or anything. And it gave some suggestions what those could be, Huffington Post and Yahoo or Google News. And so you can see, and then company websites, social networking, that was like given suggestions, that was like Twitter and Facebook, and blogs. So you can see in reach that the traditional media still have a big majority response, although it seems to be weakening a little bit. And the social media that we've been spending so much attention to in the last 10 years is not quite getting up there. So there wasn't a difference demographically except by age. And you'll see here the red bars are the 18 to 34-year-olds. And you'll see their use of the traditional media, still majority except for social networking. It was still more over a week than the social media. And then the 55 plus are using the websites and social media much less. Not a big surprise there. And then the research specific question I had about credibility was rating the credibility 1 to 5. And this is also a chart on your little placemat, and it shows the difference between 2007 and 2012. So the credibility of the traditional media may be slipping a little bit, and the others not really gaining a whole lot. We're not talking a big crowd here. Okay, second part of my study was in-depth interviews, interviews 45 minutes to an hour long with senior influentials. I had 6 in journalism, 6 from public relations, 6 in public policy. And this is what I wanted to find out from them. I wanted to delineate any shifts they saw in the gatekeeping and agenda setting for media, measure credibility, and identify those best practices. The people I interviewed included the Toronto Star publisher, VP for content at Post Media, CBC's ombudsman, or he was at the time, he's not now, Huffington Post's managing editor, the managing directors for several of the PR firms, and I guess I didn't put it on here, also talked with our president for CPRS. And among the politicals, I got former cabinet minister, former Prime Minister's Office Communications Director, Noel Hill Strategies, the Waterloo Region Chair. So I got a good sample across, but it was purposive in that I chose them. I went for people that would have strong opinions and knew the biz. So here's some of the research findings I had. Now when I have a quote up on each of these, it doesn't mean they were the only person that had that opinion. In actual fact, for this, when I asked about traditional media and gatekeeping, all the people I interviewed said, yeah, traditional media is still the gatekeepers. They are making the decisions about what's important to the government in public policy. This, as I say, I interviewed them before the Senate expenses and the Rob Ford situations. This is Kenny Yum. Kenny is managing editor at Huffington Post, but he spent all of his career, about 20 years, in websites and social media for traditional. Before he got to Huffington Post, he was at the Globe and Mail, responsible for their digital edition, that kind of thing. So I thought he said it well. A lot of people pointed out that it's the traditional media that have the professional journalists, right? And still, one person I talked with, he's now in public relations, was at the Toronto Star for many years. What he pointed out, from his point of view, is that Fred Kuntz, is that the blog sphere and the social media, it's the traditional journalists that are doing the analytical work, and then it's all in the social media. They're all opinions, and they're talking about what the journalists, the traditional or trained journalists, are talking about. But that's the kind of at that level. They're not doing primary investigative journalism at that level. Ooh, look at that. Okay. Lisa Kamel, and you may have heard this if you've been related to Edelman already, because I know this is a sort of a corporate stance. They see the traditional media as part of a shamrock, and owned media being their own products, the company's own products, social media, and they called hybrid media or aggregator, like Google News, things like that. They see these as the four parts of communications, external. So the other thing I had, and it was in my study, Edelman has a global study they do on credibility, media credibility, that's out. And I had the results, not only global, but also for Canada, just from January. It was published in January. It really gets down to owned media is now essential. It's not a nice to have anymore. You have to do it. And this is what John Crean said. Everybody's saying you have to have that direct connect with your stakeholders. You have to be able to provide all of that. I mean, what I say is the website now is like a company having a telephone number, right? It's kind of basic. This is just one from Graham Fox, again, sort of echoing that about how essential it is now that we have owned media. Now, the question about credibility for owned media, as you saw, it was kind of middle of the road, and company websites maybe even lower. Is there an opportunity for our owned media to gain that kind of credibility? Now, a lot of the journalists I talked to, they weren't as kind as Kirk. A lot of them said, ain't gonna happen. It's just Chris Waddell, who's the head of journalism at Carleton, he said he was really dismayed. He said there's a lot of companies now, they have all kinds of money. They hire the former journalists that aren't working, who produce owned media that is really fabulous. I mean, it's very expensive, but it's fabulous. It looks as good as any traditional media, he pointed out. He said, but they're not asking the hard questions. They're given the same kind of coverage, but they're not asking the questions that traditional media would ask. But Kirk pointed out, he said, if owned media is transparent, it says this is our bias, yeah, it's got potential to gain credibility, to earn credibility. John Cruikshanks, who's the publisher of the Toronto Star, on this issue, he said, here's the diff. Traditional journalists and traditional media, they're out to serve the public. That's who they're answering to. The owned media has to serve its sponsors, right? Who's supporting it. So there is where he saw the credibility difference. And then this was one of the theories I looked at. It's called, I'm going to say it wrong because I always do. It's called homophilia. And what it means is people like people that think like them. And so and I found that too in my interviews, that if people would say, well, you know, the internet, I don't know, you know, I don't believe everything, but you know, I go regularly to some sites I think are fabulous, right? The Twitter I follow is great. The blogs I read, they're wonderful, but blogs overall, you know, not sure about that. And about third-party credibility, yeah, I had to let Kirk say this. I couldn't resist. It's still important. People need that validation of it coming from someone else, the testimonial kind of thing. So my conclusions: media relations, still important strategic part of our communications plans and part of what we do. Traditional media now is one of several gatekeepers. They authenticate what the agendas that are going to be set for public policy, and the media sphere is widened. But they've got the audience right now, and trustworthiness and credibility. So our best practices, 2 areas. We have to maintain all the fundamentals we always did. We have to develop new understandings and skill sets. Those fundamentals, no one in this room, this won't be a surprise to anybody here. Storytelling is very important, having the overall strategy, relationships, but we also have to adopt all the new practices. We have to have own media. We have to roll with the punches on the changes in media. And what was pointed out, especially by some of the policy people I talk to, is they say we should have a more global perspective on things. Look for diverse views. A couple PR managers said, I really want my communications people to be demanding and questioning what they're working with. Don't just handle it and say it's okay. Look at it and look at it from different points of view, and make sure that all the questions have been answered. So from Sandra Buckler, who was Director of Communications in Stephen Harper's office for a while, she said, I don't like people who come up and meet me for the first time and then ask for a favor, right? She wasn't talking to me. I knew her beforehand. And she's a Mac grad, actually. But that's, I think, what she said. Everybody wants to be remembered. And Anne McClellan, who is a former cabinet minister in the Liberal government, made the point about having that global perspective on issues. So, my appreciation for my work, Philip Savage, who you saw in Terry's acknowledgements as well. He was my capstone supervisor. And one of our professors, Dave Schultz, is at Leger Marketing. Terry, who I have to thank for 2 things. You're going to think this is funny. The reason I got into the MCM is because I was out of journalism a couple of years in PR, and Terry said I didn't qualify to go do the MCM. So there, I had to do it. And then last year, he told me nobody cares about credibility, media credibility. So of course I had to do the study. And I also want to thank Alex, who's the current director of the program. Yeah, as Lou says. Oops. Oh. Yeah. Any questions?
The question around the Edelman barometer in your study, in terms of, you said you looked at it.
Yeah.
In terms of traditional media, they often sort of downplay or feel that it's kind of out there.
Yeah. No, it came up high, actually. What it said is globally, if I look through my notes here, I probably do have, I think I wrote it down for myself. Yeah, but what they said was traditional media is still at the top, right? And it ranked it the same, right? It said globally it's tighter though. I mean, traditional media and Google News, things like the aggregators like that search engines, it was internet search engines, are about the same. And then it goes down, it was like this. But then they looked at Canada, and in actual fact, it was like this, with traditional media much higher, and the social media and blogs being much lower in Canada, as opposed to world global. So it was a very interesting contrast. But it did echo some of the other work I looked at, on Canadians and our readership and our viewership and that kind of thing, that we are different from what's happening in the States, a little bit. Yeah. Heather?
That was just great work, Susan.
Oh, thank you, Heather.
So, she walks across the stage and gets her diploma on Tuesday.
Tuesday, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
I'm just interested in your opinion. Early on in your presentation, you talked about how digital media is reconfiguring things, including our values. And then you also talked about how social media or other digital sources are urging us to think about things in a different way. Do you believe that? I mean, do you, on one hand, you're saying traditional media is still present and accounted for, and then on the other hand, it sounds like we're moving, there's a lot of shaping and forming.
Wow, you've given me this great opportunity to make a point that I didn't put in this, but I just loved. And that was one, I did talk to one person. Of the 18 people I talked to, 17 let me use their name. Only one said no. But this is a person who was both a former MP, senior MP, and he's in our trade now in a senior level. And what he pointed out, which I thought was really interesting, was that nowadays, social media doesn't cut it. Things can be involved in social media, but it's only when it gets picked up by the traditional media that everybody becomes aware of it. So, if somebody's sophisticated, if you're sophisticated about your social media, you can get it to kind of rise above the line and get the traditional media accepting it, and then it flies everywhere. And I thought it was an awfully good point, just that, there's a lot of going on, but it's when the traditional media picks it up. And in our local area, in the Hamilton area, that was really obvious with the Tom Bosma, a man who went on a test drive with his truck a few weeks ago and he was murdered. But the first about that was the whole family and his church and everybody set up a really active social media, and then it was when that got really active, then it got into the traditional media. Yeah. Yes, Terry.
So if Gawker by itself said
yes.
video
yes. Yes, would have anybody have listened?
Yeah. The fact that the Star.
Yep. Who would have lawyered it?
Right.
Right.
So social media or new social platforms still need the credibility of traditional media.
Yeah.
To say that what they do is equal.
Yeah. I think I've thought of that myself, Terry. I mean, Gawker is U.S., it's American. If they'd come out and say we have a video on the Friday I think it was, I remember that whole weekend, CBC, every newscast talked about, we haven't seen this video, but the Toronto Star says, right? It's alleged that. But every time they mentioned it, they said, we haven't had the opportunity to validate this, the Toronto Star says, and Gawker say. Right, and so a lot of it's, I see that as a great example of this. Alex?
It's not the same thing with Julian Assange, right?
You wrote about it. I've got you in my paper, actually, and what you said about this. Yeah.
He tried to go to social media only route, and nobody listened.
Yeah.
And it was when he put together a consortium of top newspapers that he finally had a platform.
Yes, once he went to The Guardian in the U.S. or in UK, and then Washington Post, was it, in the States? And once they started to publicize it, it got lift. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Susan. That's very interesting research, and I think very timely given the pace of change in traditional and social media.
Record?
Go on record with it. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you to everybody who put on my for just a very quick thank you to everybody for coming, and participating in our research presentation this morning. And thank you very much to our two presenters. Very interesting research and certainly very impressive work. And please be in touch. You can feel free to email me or talk to other members of the Education Council if you have ideas for how this session might expand and grow in future. And keep your eyes peeled, because next year we will send out another call for research and presentations. And if you're working on projects and you would like to be part of this, we'd be more than happy to see your work. So thank you very much.
Thank you.